U.S. Central Command says Iran fired cruise missiles and drones at U.S. flagged ships and U.S. Navy ships in the Strait earlier.
Not to Iran to tax, toll, or control. To our partners, allies, and the rest of the world, this is a temporary mission.
At 8:41 in the morning, 150 contacts appear on the warship's air picture almost at the exact same time. Not missiles, not manned aircraft, not civilian traffic, drones. 150 Iranian attack drones spreading across a 240-degree arc from bearing 018 to bearing 258, flying low, fast, and uneven, some skimming just above the water, some riding higher behind thermal haze, all of them already inside 18 miles before the combat system fully classified them because they had come in with emissions dark, guidance links nearly silent, and routes pre-programmed from multiple launch sites along the Iranian coast that had shown no obvious pattern shift for days. All 150 crossing the outer threat threshold within 31 seconds of each other. Not random, timed, calculated, built around one vicious idea. If a warship is forced to defend against a sky full of threats arriving from nearly every angle at once, then it has no single axis to face, no clean corridor to dominate, and no comfortable geometry to solve before steel starts breaking. 7 minutes, that was the number. 7 minutes from recognition to terminal impact if the drones held their lanes, the U.S. Navy had trained for cruise missiles coming in hard and low from a vector. It had trained for drones in layered raids. It had trained for ballistic threats, saturation attacks, swarm harassment, torpedoes, mines, electronic deception, and missiles launched under coastal cover. But 150 attack drones arriving from 240 degrees over the Strait of Hormuz was not a normal attack. It was arithmetic, and the arithmetic said 7 minutes was not enough. The warship at the center of the picture was a U.S. guided missile destroyer moving through the strait with one escort ship farther off its quarter, combat air patrol overhead, a helicopter already airborne on routine watch, and every radar, optical feed, and tactical circuit inside the formation pushing data into the same combat network. And still the first reaction in combat information was not confidence. It was silence, because everybody in that room understood the same thing at the same time. This was not a probe. This was not harassment. This was not another pressure play meant to generate footage and headlines. This was a kill attempt built around mass, angle, timing, and altitude. If you want the full truth, hit like so, this story reaches more people. Below the main deck, Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance had already been uneasy for almost an hour. At 7:56 that morning, something in the electromagnetic picture off the northeastern sector had bothered her. Not enough to justify alarm, not enough to call the captain, not enough to trigger weapons readiness by itself, but enough to keep a combat systems officer with 14 years of electronic warfare experience inside Combat Systems Central long after her watch should have turned over. For 45 minutes, she had been moving between consoles, emitter libraries, decoy status boards, jammer cooling feeds, power transfer maps, and close-in defense sector assignments, checking the exact systems she believed an enemy planner would try to overload if they ever came for a destroyer with drones instead of missiles. She was standing near the power management panel when the threat alarm sounded at 8:41. She did not reach first for the voice circuit. She reached for the load transfer control, because there was a number living in her head, a number rehearsed so often that it no longer felt like theory. It felt like instinct. 12 relay drones. That was the threshold. If Iran had built this swarm the way she suspected, then at least 12 of the 150 would not be strikers at all. They would be coordinators, altitude nodes, timing references, signal bridges. Kill those, jam those, or deceive those, and the swarm might still arrive. But it would not arrive as one weapon. At 8:41 and 19 seconds, Vance diverted reserve electrical capacity away from non-essential systems and pushed it into the ship's electronic warfare rate, radar discrimination package, and decoy launch logic. Not because she knew she was right. Because if she was right, she needed maximum jamming power before the drones crossed the next range gate. And if she was wrong, the ship would sacrifice maneuver margin, thermal reserve, and system comfort for no reason, all while carrying a hotter combat signature in the middle of a compressed battle space. Nobody outside the engineering and combat systems chain might ever know why. At 8:42, the combat air patrol was already turning. 4 fighters, 2 north, 2 south, all 4 accelerating before their turns were complete, driving for the highest and outermost contacts first, not because those drones were the deadliest individually, but because anything holding altitude in a swarm like this might be one of the brains keeping the rest synchronized. The first missile came off the northern lead jet at 8:42 and 11 seconds and erased a contact at 16.9 miles. Then another, but every kill created the same problem. One drone destroyed did not break the geometry. 149 still did. The southern pair fired seconds later, now 144, then 141, then 138, and the picture kept shrinking inward. Not from one direction, from all of them. The fighters were stripping away the outer logic, while the main body kept coming low over the sea, using clutter, tanker stacks, surface glare, and compressed coastline angles to make classification harder than it should have been. Each pass cost time, each turn cost seconds, each second belonged to the drones. By 8:43, 132 contacts remained, and the outer envelope was already collapsing faster than the fighters could reset for another clean shot. On the bridge, the captain did not ask whether the ship could kill them all. He asked one question only: how many reached terminal range? That was the only number that mattered now. Because this attack had never depended on all 150 getting through. It depended on enough. At 8:44, the first electronic countermeasure package hit. The destroyer did not simply jam the sky. It sculpted interference. 3 directional walls of electronic noise drove outward across the densest approach corridors, while active decoys launched to port and sport, climbing just enough to look like brighter, cleaner targets than the ship itself. And for a moment, the sky changed. Tiny deviations, then wider ones. A few drones climbed when they should have stayed low. Others drifted left. A cluster in the western approach lost spacing and compressed into its own field. One higher contact went blind, widened, and vanished off its planned lane entirely. That was the first sign Vance had been right. Comment shield if you think this crew deserved to survive. But the swarm did not collapse. It adapted. That was the terrifying part, because these were not hobby drones, not improvised toys. These were attack platforms routed through pre-planned logic with enough onboard autonomy to keep pressing even after parts of the network started dying. The jamming was hurting them, not stopping them. And the closer they came, the less room there was for error on either side. At 8:44 and 37 seconds, the escort ship opened fire, not wildly, not theatrically, just disciplined intercepts into the thickest surviving lanes. Missiles first, then gunfire against the lower, nearer contacts once range compressed enough to make the math worthwhile. Drones began disappearing in bursts now instead of singles. 2, 3, 5 in quick succession as defensive fire started walking through the more stable clusters. The pace of destruction accelerated, but so did the pace of arrival. That was the trap. This was what made the attack intelligent. The closer the drones got, the easier they became to classify, and the less time there was for that classification to matter. At 8:45, the destroyer's own missiles joined the fight in force. Short-range interceptors leapt upward in pairs, punching into the highest confidence threat lanes. More drones vanished. Fragments dropped into the water. Some spiraled, burning into tanker wakes. Others disintegrated so completely they seemed to vanish from the screens before crews fully processed the kill. But the count was still too high, because this attack had never been built to survive outer defense. It had been built to force a minimum number through it. At 8:45 and 28 seconds, the ship's helicopter, which had already been airborne when the raid started, shifted from observation to engagement support. It was not there to win the battle alone. It was there to clean the picture, to classify what radar could not fully trust at low altitude, to push target updates, to separate decoys, relays, and true terminal threats. From above, the raid looked less like a wall and more like a machine trying desperately to stay a wall while being ripped apart. Some drones were still coordinated. Some were no longer obeying the same timing. Some had started arriving early, others late. That mattered, because swarms do not become lethal through numbers alone. They become lethal through synchronized arrival. Break the timing chain, and you are no longer fighting one weapon. You are fighting fragments. At 8:46, the first drones crossed 7 miles. Now every layer was compressing toward the ship. Fighter passes were becoming riskier. Missile expenditure was accelerating. Electronic warfare was still distorting lanes, but no longer with the clean dominance it had in the opening minute. And inside the destroyer, everyone understood the same thing. Outer defense had bought time. It had not solved the problem. 91 drones remained, 7 miles, 4 minutes. The close-in guns shifted deeper into readiness. SeaRAM locked its first terminal basket. The bridge adjusted course by just a few degrees, enough to alter approach geometry without sacrificing the ship's overall movement through the strait. That slight maneuver said everything. The crew had stopped trying to prevent a fight. They were now shaping the best possible version of the fight they were definitely going to get. At 8:46 and 44 seconds, the first terminal cluster dropped under 5 miles. SeaRAM fired. A streak, a hit, then another, then 2 more fast enough to feel almost simultaneous. The leading edge of the eastern attack lane disappeared in fire and fragments, but new contacts were already filling the gaps. One swarm member died, another inherited the lane. That was the logic behind mass. The raid did not care which individual drone arrived, it cared that enough arrived. At 8:47, the destroyer's guns began taking over from missiles in selected sectors. The sound was no longer separate events. It was continuity, a machine solving arithmetic through steel, heat, and timing. Drones burst apart over the water. Others cartwheeled, burning into the sea. A few survived near misses, only to wobble just long enough for the next layer to finish them. Still they came, not as one perfect ring anymore, as shards, broken geometry. Fragments of the original design, but fragments still moving inward from too many angles, still fast enough, still numerous enough, still carrying enough explosive weight to turn one hit into a fireball and several into catastrophe. Type yes if you want to see the full drone wall collapse in real time. At 8:47 and 39 seconds, the first contacts crossed 3 miles. Now the picture got uglier. Sea clutter, spray, heat bloom, smoke from kills, fragments falling through other sectors. The closer the drones got, the more the sky turned into compressed violence. Tracking quality that had looked clinical at distance now became brutally human. Acquire, confirm, prioritize, fire, reacquire. The destroyer's close-in weapon system activated and found the nearest lead target at 2.1 miles. The burst lasted fractions of a second. The drone ceased to exist, then the gun shifted. Then it found another, then another. Every engagement bought time measured in heartbeats. The helicopter made one final support pass to identify a dense southern cluster riding low under the smoke layer. That was when Vance saw it. 3 relay drones still alive, higher than the rest. Not many, just enough. Just enough to keep parts of the swarm behaving like a coordinated weapon instead of disconnected attackers. At 8:48 and 2 seconds, she dumped the last clean reserve into a narrow-band electromagnetic spike targeted through the southern sector. It was a gamble inside the gamble. If she guessed wrong, the ship wasted precious power in the last 2 minutes of the fight. If she guessed right, the swarm lost its final timing spine. The effect was not dramatic. No cinematic flash. No explosion in the sky. Just disorder. A southern lane that had been arriving clean suddenly bent outward. 4 drones dipped too low. 2 climbed into the gun basket they had been about to avoid. A western cluster compressed so tightly that one interceptor burst shattered multiple targets in the same heartbeat. And for the first time since 8:41, the incoming picture stopped feeling inevitable. But not safe. Never safe. 54 drones remained at 2 miles, less than 2 minutes. Every system that could fire was firing. Every operator who could decide was deciding. There was no reserve now. No hidden layer. No secret trick. The response was already near perfect, and the problem was still alive. At 8:48 and 39 seconds, the nearest terminal line crossed 1.4 miles. The sows reached a firing rhythm so fast it barely sounded like separate bursts anymore. Acquire, fire, cycle, acquire, cycle. Drones disintegrated in sprays of sparks and shredded composite fragments. One exploded so close to the water that its debris slapped the surface and skipped forward like burning stones. Another kept coming after partial damage until a second burst cut it apart less than a mile out. 41 remained, then 38, then 34. But the count was becoming deceptive. Because at this range, the question was no longer how many drones existed. It was how many clean seconds remained to stop them. At 8:49, the captain gave the order everybody had been expecting and nobody wanted to hear. All hands brace for impact. There it was. The sentence that means defense might not be enough. The sentence that means training is about to turn into damage control. The sentence that means survival may now depend on what happens after the first thing gets through. Below deck, Vance held her sector jamming pattern in place even as thermal warnings climbed across the console. The system was running hotter than doctrine liked. Hotter than maintenance officers ever wanted. Hotter than anyone would choose in peacetime. But peacetime was gone. 30 drones crossed 0.9 miles, then 26, then 22. The guns found more. SeaRAM killed 2 in quick succession off the port quarter. The escort ship reached across with a dangerous final engagement into a lane uncomfortably close to the destroyer's own defensive zone and erased another 3. Now 19, then 17. But 17 was still too many, because 17 drones arriving within seconds against the mast, radar faces, bridge, and forward launcher sections could wreck sensors, start layered fires, blind the ship, and turn survival into drift. At 8:49 and 31 seconds, the last clean long-angle interception happened at less than 700 meters. 1 drone vanished in white fire. 16 remained. Share this video so more people understand what was really hiding in that sky. Then the terminal phase began. At 8:49 and 36 seconds, the first surviving drone broke through the outer burst pattern and dove for what should have been the brightest radar return on the ship. But the brightest return was no longer the ship. It was the deception field Vance had built minutes earlier. The drone missed wide and detonated off the starboard beam. Then another followed false geometry and exploded short. Then a third. That was the hidden difference. Iran's planners had built the raid around the destroyer's expected electronic signature, expected course line, expected radar presentation, expected thermal behavior. But the ship was no longer where the drones believed it was, not electronically, not geometrically, not as a target. Still, some got through. At 8:49 and 41 seconds, 3 drones struck. Not all in the same place. Not all with the effect the attackers wanted. One hit high against the outer superstructure and blew antennas, shattered panels, and sprayed fragments across the deck. A second struck farther aft and started a fierce but localized fire. A third detonated near the forward section hard enough to rattle the entire hull and throw sailors off balance across multiple compartments. Lights flickered. One console died. A radar face degraded. A petty officer in combat information went down against a bulkhead and got back up because the track picture was still live and the attack was still in progress. But the chain failure the attackers needed never came, because the swarm was no longer arriving as one weapon. It was arriving as leftovers, broken timing, broken sectors, broken math. At 8:49 and 44 seconds, 4 more drones entered what should have been the fatal basket. This was the moment, the one planners fear, the last rush. The one that comes after attention should already be exhausted. Except the ship's attention was not exhausted. Its close-in guns were still solving. Its decoys were still lying. Its jamming was still distorting. Its crew was still functioning. One drone vanished under direct gunfire at roughly 300 meters. Another clipped a false signature and exploded in spray off the bow. A third got close enough for people on deck to hear it before a final burst cut it into fragments. The last surviving terminal drone tried to dive through smoke and debris on a broken line toward the bridge. For one terrible instant, it looked clean. Then the close-in gun corrected, and the drone came apart less than 200 meters from steel. By 8:49 and 49 seconds, the raid was dying. The surviving Iranian drones either fell burning into the strait, spiraled away blind, or broke apart under the last defensive engagements. Some debris still struck the water near the ship. Some fragments rained across the deck, but the swarm itself had failed. The 7-minute attack that was supposed to overwhelm one U.S. warship through sheer aerial mass ended with the warship still afloat, still armed, still maneuvering, and still in the fight. That is the whole theory of drone swarm warfare. Not equal strength, unequal consequence. Iran did not need all 150 drones to hit. It needed enough of them to blind, burn, cripple, and shock. America's answer was expensive in missiles, ammunition, thermal strain, system wear, and human stress. But in close naval combat, cost is not the first number that matters. Outcome is. The ship survives, its command survives, its guns survive, most of its sensors survive, its mission survives. The world does not wake up to footage of an American warship burning helplessly in Hormuz beneath a sky full of drones. And that is why the attack fails strategically the moment the final terminal basket collapses short of the bridge. Because the battle proved something real. It proved that a modern U.S. warship in Hormuz can be compressed, stressed, nearly saturated, nearly touched from every direction that matters. It proved that mass drones, if timed correctly, can drag even advanced naval defenses into seconds from disaster geometry. But it proved something else too. One U.S. warship is not just one hull waiting to be swarmed. It is a layered moving network of radar, deception, missiles, guns, electronic warfare, aviation support, tactical logic, and crews trained to make cleaner decisions under pressure than the attack plan can survive. The Iranian plan had real strengths: distributed launch points, emission control, relay logic, altitude layering, thermal masking, terminal compression, psychological pressure. Every layer was real. Every layer got closer than the Americans wanted. Every layer failed. Not because the ship was untouchable. You just heard how close it came. Not because the defenders were fearless. They were seconds from a very different headline. The attack failed because the Americans never fought as one ship against many drones. They fought as one organism. One picture, one timing chain. One shield made of overlapping systems and faster decision under stress than the attacking math could survive. And hidden inside that shield was one decision made below deck by a combat systems officer who understood something the enemy had counted on. They thought the ship's signature would stay predictable. It didn't. By 8:56, fires were being contained. Fragment sweeps were underway, damaged systems were being isolated, replacement circuits were being routed. The helicopter was still overhead, mapping the debris field. Weapons crews were resetting what they could, and the destroyer was still moving through Hormuz. That is the message drone swarm doctrine hates most. The target was not blinded, the target adapted. If this shocked you, comment Hormuz below. Like this video if it changed how you see modern naval warfare. Tell me in the comments which defensive layer mattered most in stopping 150 Iranian drones. The fighters, the missiles, the electronic warfare, or the close-in guns. And subscribe because the next breakdown goes even deeper into the exact defensive chain that kept a U.S. Warship alive during the 7-minute drone attack that nearly turned the Strait of Hormuz into fire.